to the Life is an Escape Room podcast, where learning about yourself is an adventure. Here's your hosts, the Eanes escapeletes, Chris and Jeff.
Hello, fellow escapeletes. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Life is an Escape Room podcast. I'm Chris.
And I'm Jeff.
And we are excited you've joined us today. For today's topic, we have Jamie, also known as the armchair escapist.
Hello. Thanks
Welcome, Jamie.
It's really good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, before we jump in, do you mind sharing a little bit of your background for our listeners and viewers?
Sure. So I'm Jamie. I'm a freelance puzzle designer. So I've been doing this for probably since just before lockdown in 2020. I've designed tabletop games, a few digital games, and one or two live escape events as well. I'm also a co-host and puzzle maker for the Infinite Escape Room podcast, and I run Armchair Escapist, which is a review blog that looks at tabletop escape games and also looks at live escape games in Wales, in the UK. Very geographically niched, but it means I can say that I'm the premier Welsh escape room blogger because I'm the only one.
I love it. Well, and I mean, we love the escape room industry. We love the community, and as we've had conversations before, this, you can learn a lot about yourself with interactions with individuals in the industry, with doing the games, with each other. And you bring another unique perspective into that, and that's through game design. So our topic today is how escape rooms, escape games, escape room experiences help teach us to communicate with others through the ability to adjust our perspective. So where do we need to go with this first?
I think it's interesting seeing it from both sides of the curtain, both as an enthusiast and as a game designer. I suppose as a designer, or if you're hosting a room, you do get the benefit of that degree of separation where you can see the interaction between players. When you're in the thick of it and there's a time pressure, you don't necessarily want to listen to that side of things and want to see things from other people's perspectives, but it is incredibly useful for you to do so. And what's interesting in an escape room scenario is that sometimes it's a metaphorical way of seeing things from another perspective. In other cases, it's quite a literal thing. When I did an escape room 6 months ago with my brother and sister, and we were stuck on a puzzle for a good 5-10 minutes. And the only way we got past it was because my sister is a little bit shorter than my brother and I was able to see a message that was printed on a door lintel in the next room through a window.
Wow.
And if it wasn't for the fact that she was a little bit shorter, we might not have escaped that room. So sometimes it takes on a more literal approach.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes we literally need to see things differently. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Right. Oh, well, and when you're designing games, what do you try to do? Do you try to build some of that perspective in? Is there any sort of deliberate attempt for that?
With things like that, luckily, I've not been in a position where that's been a big issue. The live events that I've run have been more sort of a group tabletop experience rather than a physical, all-encompassing room. But it's something to keep in mind, and I've tried to do perspective puzzles in the past on a tabletop one. But I found with those that it's very much a case of either you know it or you don't. So there's a particular kind of puzzle where you have to tilt the paper to a certain angle to see the text in its entirety. Right. And it's really cool when you see it. But once you've seen it once, you spot it every single time. Yeah. And if you've never seen it before, you might never see it unless someone else tells you. So it's a really fine balance to try and strike with that, of knowing whether you're making a puzzle too difficult intentionally by doing that, or accidentally making it too easy because it's something that everybody's seen before.
Yeah. Oh, I can totally see how that relates to, we'll call it real world, right? So sometimes you can't see something even in front of you, until someone points it out. Yeah. And other times, you have to train yourself to see something. Maybe it could be certain interactions with individuals, or coming against the same problem a few times, but you train yourself to see it a little differently, and then you're able to work through it.
Yeah, I think one of the one of the worst curses in an escape room scenario is sort of functional fixedness, where you go into an escape room and you see a mop and you go, that's a mop. It's set decoration. I know what a mop does. It mops things. I'm not going to look at that mop. Why would I? And then after 10 minutes of scrambling around, you get a hint from your games master and you look a bit closer at that mop and there's a hook on the end that you can use to hook some keys.
Right.
Yes.
All it took was you to have a little bit of curiosity and go, is that what I expect it to be?
Yes.
There's a reason it's in
Right.
this room, unless the games master is sadistic and puts red herrings in. It's not there by accident. So trying to shed that bias a little bit.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
allow yourself to be curious. That's
Yeah.
why you're in an escape room.
I'm just curious, have you seen that outside of an escape room? Have you found yourself like, this can only be used this way? And then you thought, wait a minute, let me think back to that mop or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And seen something different?
It's usually when I'm trying to use a screwdriver as a hammer. That's when it usually comes into play. But that's mostly because I'm terrible at DIY. And I'm lazy and I don't want to look for the hammer. That's usually when that happens.
Yes.
But it has helped. It's sort of helped in sort of work situations where sort of the boring side of it, if you're locked in an Excel document and you know a particular formula and you're like, this should work. Like, well, why didn't I just let myself be curious and see if there's a better way to do it?
Right.
And just ask people who might not have seen that particular problem before. Because it's so easy to get bogged down in your own ego sometimes.
Yes.
And your own expectations of how you think the world works.
Right. Now, when you're designing games, do you deliberately think about like splitting up the players, or what do you do to sort of challenge their ability to interact versus just do a single puzzle? Is there an intention on that? What are your thoughts on that?
It's something that I'm exploring a lot more recently. So I'm working on an escape experience to be hosted over the next month with some school kids. And teamwork and communication are big things for the learning outcomes. So one of the things I want to try and do is split the team in the initial stages. And whenever I've done those in escape rooms myself, it's been satisfying to a degree of having the two disparate parts come together and that feeling of camaraderie once you finally get it. But I'm also a little bit disappointed that I've not seen on that side of the curtain. I've not experienced those puzzles. I've missed out on part of the game. And you can't go back and replay the game just for that small segment. So
Yeah.
I'm always hesitant to do a split party thing because somebody's missing out on something.
I relate.
Now, have you done side-by-side challenges with anyone where you're doing the same room and you're just trying to see, if you know what I mean, where it's an identical room and two teams come in and they do the same thing, and it's sort of a challenge to see how they do? Have you ever done any of those?
Yes. So an event that I designed over Halloween called Fanny's Fortune had 6 identical lockboxes. It was like an art cafe. So we had 6 teams all working on these lockboxes. That part of the experience was the same for everybody. And then there was a part at the very end where each of those lockboxes held one part of the final answer. So they all had to work together at the end. And that was interesting because we had one team who were escape enthusiasts. They'd done 400 rooms between them. Gordon and Liz from Review the Room. Love you guys. They blitzed it in 20 minutes. They
Wow.
knew, they understood my brain. They knew how my mind worked, so they could just do it. We had another team that had never done an escape room before. They literally heard about the event that night, booked it on a whim, finished it within 60 minutes, and did pretty well. There was then a third team that had done a few escape rooms in the past, thought themselves to be pretty good, took way longer than the 60 minutes, and had other teams trying to help them. So it was interesting to see the massive disconnect between certain teams of players. And on the team that didn't do as well as the rest, ultimately what let them down was not listening to one another and allowing somebody else to say, hey, what if we try this?
Yeah.
And there was one person who had really good ideas, but didn't feel able to voice them. Nobody was giving them the time. One person took over the conversation.
Yeah.
And it was a shame. They could have gotten out really quickly had they listened to that one person.
You know, something you just said It just like I just had an aha moment, right? So we'll go into rooms where it just feels like everything is flowing and this is amazing. And it's probably well, I mean, there's multiple reasons, but it could be that our brains work the same as the game designer, right? And we are in flow and we're following that. And there's other rooms where you go in and we're very frustrated. It's still a good room though.
Yeah.
Right. So it's still a very good room, well designed. And I'm thinking it might be just because our brain works differently than the designer. What are your thoughts on that?
That's something I come up against a lot when doing the podcast puzzles. So when I design them, my wife usually play tests them, which is great. But the tricky thing is that we've been together 20 years.
Yeah.
She knows my mind inside and out.
Yes.
So in one way, it's a good litmus test that if she can't get it, it's way too hard. But more often than not, she'll get it in 12 minutes and they'll present that to the podcast and they struggle on what I consider to be the simplest bit.
Yeah.
Because they've not had the joy of knowing my mind for 20 years.
Yeah.
Joy in inverted commas.
Now, what's your thought on clues, on getting help? Like when people get stuck, how do you anticipate that? Is there anything that you build into your puzzles where there's places where you think there's obvious times when a clue would just help get over that hump?
Yes. What I try to do when I design games is try to treat the hint system as essentially another player working with you to solve that puzzle. And the difficulty level of a game, making it easier or more difficult, is just the level of those hints that you bake into the game from the beginning. So having, say, half a dozen hints to lead you to a puzzle that you've basically put a step-by-step walkthrough in there. After playtesting, depending on how difficult you want it to be, is either adding more of those steps in the game materials in an authentic way, or taking them back out again and hoping that the players make the connections themselves, and trying to strike that balance of letting the players pull those threads together themselves. I suppose that just comes through rigorous playtesting.
I can see almost so relating back to life lessons here, right? So you can be in alignment with the game designer, with the way the clues are. You can be not in alignment. Maybe you think differently, right? But it doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's more of, what am I trying to say here? Okay, so when we're working with someone in the workplace and we're having trouble understanding them, right? It doesn't mean that we're right, they're wrong, or they're right, we're wrong. It's about asking for, we'll call it clues, asking for help, appreciating that the way that their mind works is different than ours, and that we actually need them to help get through the experience, whether it's an escape room experience or life. I don't know. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that you see in an escape room perspective that applies to your own development as well is people often mistakenly conflate experience with expertise. Just because you've done a lot of escape rooms doesn't mean you're any good at it.
Yes.
Just because you've been in IT for 30 years
yes.
doesn't mean you're any good at it. So sometimes having somebody with less experience brings in the right questions and a fresh perspective that allows for more creative thinking and more lateral thinking that you might not have considered because you've been so jaded by being in the same place for that amount of time. I'm still terrible at escape rooms. I don't think I'll ever get any better than I am now.
Oh my God.
Oh, we always tell the game masters, it's like, no, we've done a lot, but give us clues because we'd much rather enjoy the experience.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like,
how many times have we looked at something and we're like, oh, I know what that is.
Over and
over.
And
we were wrong because of our past experience. Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
I get it often when I'm in an Egyptian themed escape room because I studied Egyptology at university. I learned hieroglyphs to read and write them. So as soon as I see hieroglyphs, I can't help but translate them in my head, and I go, like I'm coming from an academia perspective, trying to put the grammar together, and all it takes is finding an alphabet taped under a table, and that's what's intentional. I've led us down the wrong path for a good 10 minutes because I think I know better than the game master.
Oh, and you probably do, but the game master, because they didn't know the alphabet, made up their own just using the symbols, and then You know, you said something about the school children, and one of our themes is using the experience from an escape room in real life. The idea of designing something for school kids, that sounds really exciting to me. How are you? How's your approach to that? How are you going to go in, and like, what would your thoughts be on when you're developing that sort of thing versus an adult based room or puzzles?
I think the main consideration for me is trying to make sure that they feel comfortable opening up to try things. I think it's going to be it's a lot easier for somebody to dominate a conversation. I would imagine when you're in a younger audience, and for people that might have really good ideas, they don't have to be actively shut down, but feel that they can't speak up. And usually those are the people with the best ideas, or they're the ones to go, what if I put this against this? Oh my God, something just popped open. You won't get that because somebody thinks they might have the right idea. So it's something I'm going to have to navigate carefully to make sure that each of the kids in that room has the opportunity and the chance to go, oh, let's try this. Why don't we do this? Can I give this a go? I'm not sure how I'm going to do it yet. They might have quite forceful personalities, but we'll see. They're teenagers, so who knows?
Well, there's got to be some connection, and you can help me out, please, with this question, but there's got to be some connection between you knowing the human mind in design, right? I'm sure it helps you in real life. Maybe that is the question, right? So for game design, how people are naturally going to react, different things like that. How do you use that in your everyday experiences outside of game design?
Oh, that's a good question. A lot of it comes from allowing myself to be surprised by somebody. You see it often in an escape room where, like, the most valued player in an escape room isn't the person you expect, because there's one specific aspect that you would never get in a million years. And as far as you're concerned, you didn't know this person was good at this one thing. So an example is an escape room I did recently with my younger brother had several riddles as part of the escape room experience. I hate riddles in an escape room. I don't consider them to be valued puzzles, because either you know them or you don't. And within seconds, he'd figured out every riddle.
Wow.
He didn't know them before. I was like, where did this come from? Like, I've known you all of your life and most of mine. This is news to me. So yeah, just I think when you step over that threshold, it could be in an escape room, it could be in your work life, is just trying to shed that preconception of what people can do and what they're capable of, and letting yourself be surprised and letting yourself be a little bit curious, because it could apply to you as well. You might find that you're actually really good at a physical puzzle, or being a creative thinker, even if you've spent 20 years as an accountant. You've just never had the opportunity to do that.
Oh, I love that.
I'm really interested because I have two brothers, an older and a younger, so I'm the middle child here. But
Same.
you said something very interesting, but it's the idea of when you're in an escape room with your brother, how do you interact with your brother and communicate with your brother different than you would with a friend or a coworker or somebody that you maybe a wife that you're getting to know more, but you presume that you know your brother well. But how would you, can you expand on the idea of like, how would you approach it differently between your brother and someone else, especially in the idea of communication?
That's an interesting one. And I suppose one of the things about being in Britain is that when we're in an escape room scenario, more often than not, it's a private booking.
Right.
You have your team, you have your family, your friends, your co-workers. You should know them pretty well already. It's very rare in the UK to have an escape room where it's open to strangers or people you don't know that well.
Which we're so jealous of, by the way.
I'm not sure what I would do in that situation. It sounds bizarre to me. The only times that does happen is when we've been sort of on bachelor parties, and it's people that one person who knows another person, but you don't know them that well. And in those situations, it has been a lot more difficult to get success. We've still managed it, but it's usually been people sort of go to the four corners of the room, they work on their puzzles, and occasionally somebody will shout, "Oh, I've got a thing," and they'll put it in the center. It's a lot more difficult. The way that I try to get around that is unintentionally, I've become sort of the cheerleader of the room. As soon as we're in, I'm wearing the costume, I'm dancing, I'm whooping and cheering at every lock that's open to just try and get that energy up in the room. And it's just childish excitement for the most part, and hoping that rubs off on other people, and then they feel open to talking and communicating.
Oh, I love it. Now,
Oh yeah, that's a really great the tool in your tool bag, so to speak.
Yeah.
I never thought of just sort of being the idea of actually just coaxing the best out of others. I normally am thinking more along the line of communicating or something. But that's a good,
that's
awesome.
awesome.
A good tool.
It translates well into life.
I mean, in those, you're in a locker room for 60 minutes. No one cares if you're an idiot. Who have you got to embarrass? And if they're strangers, you'll never see them again, so it doesn't matter.
There you go.
Right, yeah.
I love it. Okay, so when we asked you to come on this show and talk about perspective, is there anything in particular that you definitely wanted the viewers/listeners to know about?
I think I've mentioned it earlier, but the main thing for me is following your own curiosity and not letting yourself get bogged down by what you think, the way you think the world looks and works.
Yes.
Especially in escape room scenarios, when you cross over that threshold, you're not Jim from The Office. You are an archaeologist. You're a spy. Like, why don't you lean into that roleplay aspect a little bit? I mean, it'll help from the puzzle solving perspective that you can think,
Yes.
how would a spy do this? How would an archaeologist
Yes.
think like this? If the game designer's done their work and done it well, those two things should marry up quite well. But at the very least, it should shed some of those notions that you've already built up in your head and let yourself be surprised. But, this jar isn't designed to hold something. It's designed to come apart and be used as a key or something like that. I'm making things up on the spot. But
Yeah.
one of the things that someone said recently, they went to an escape room and they saw, I don't know if you're familiar with the Pythagoras cup, where
That sounds familiar.
you fill it with liquid to a certain level and it's fine, but once it gets past a certain threshold of liquid, some sort of weird science magic happens and the entire thing drains and becomes empty.
Oh, wow.
So if you look at that and just say, oh, it's just a jar, you fill it half full and go, it doesn't do anything. It's a jar. And then you walk away. But if you allow yourself to be curious and you keep filling it, what's going to happen if I keep doing this? It'll then drain. You might find a key.
Right.
And then that eureka moment,
Wow.
that something shocked you and surprised you, that's the joy of escape rooms.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Less
Perfect on
applicable to The
perspective
Office.
taking. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Don't
really
don't
good.
keep filling the
Yeah,
coffee
absolutely.
after it's not going to do anything there.
But I love too how you're asking yourself, like, how would a spy look at this? You could do that at work too. How would my boss see this? How would my colleague see this? Yeah, how would my client or customer see this? Huge, right? Huge translation into the world. I love. That's why escape rooms are awesome, and everyone needs to do them.
Whenever I'm in the office, I always advocate, probably louder than I should, for escape rooms being a really good team building exercise.
Absolutely.
Or to teach anything, whether it's like IT security or some new policy change, like put it into an escape room. People will retain the information. They'll have fun with it.
Oh, yeah.
And they'll work with people they haven't before and they'll have a great time.
Oh, that sounds like a call to action for everyone listening, if anything.
If you're in control of any kind of budget, get someone to design an escape room for your company.
That's it.
Yes. So now, before we get to your final piece of advice, can you share maybe a 2-minute commercial on any products or services you'd like our listeners/viewers to know about?
Sure. So as I said, I'm a freelance puzzle designer. So I can do consultation work. I can do design work and play testing of tabletop escape games and work with companies on creating escape experiences. In terms of physical things that I've created, I've got a family-friendly print-and-play escape game for kids called Dragon Egg Quest. And there's one coming up in the next few months that's for an older audience called Pirate Party Quest. And those are the main two things I've got at the moment. And then check out the Infinite Escape Room podcast. It's part escape room, part D&D role play. It's very British. There's a lot of weirdness going on. Everyone's got
Which
a
is
drink in
awesome.
their hand. It's wacky and it's wonderful. I was a big fan of the podcast before I joined as a co-host, and I love it. It's so fun.
Oh, and what website should folks go to, or websites, or?
So I'm at armchairescapist.com, and it's also Armchair Escapist on Facebook and Instagram. And then check out TheInfiniteEscapeRoom.com for the podcast.
Excellent.
Great. And so what's your final piece of advice for our viewers and listeners?
I would say it is open yourself up to the possibility of being surprised and embrace the joy when that happens, because the older you get and the longer you're in a place, whether that be a company or a relationship or anything, is the opportunities for surprise get less, and you start to get comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Why should you? Let yourself be surprised and let people surprise you, because that's part of the fun. And if you're in an escape room, if you're in your job or whatever you work on, is try to follow that curiosity. Everyone's got it for something, and that leads to passion, and that leads to just living a better life in general.
Yeah.
Oh,
Great advice. Great
awesome advice. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jamie.
That's great. Thanks very much for having me. It was good fun.
Want to learn more about the Eanes Escapeletes, buy the book, or read the blog? Visit lifeisanescaperoom.com.